Right, good evening everyone. We'll make a bit of a start. Welcome to tonight's pro game webinar where we'll be focusing in on the mid-block. Before we get going with the webinar itself, do a quick couple of introductions just to get us going. So my name's Robbie Pringle. I'm Women's National Coach Developer for the FA. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jimmy Gilligan and Joe Sheehan tonight. Jimmy Gilligan is FA National Coach Developer within the men's game and has a wealth of experience of working within the men's game from a coaching point of view as well, most recently with Forest. Joe is currently Ipswich Town women's manager and also manager of their 16 to 21 academy team who operate in the Women's Super League Academy setup. And Joe will unpick that a little bit further as we go into the webinar tonight, as well as sharing his experiences with the women's team as well. And Jimmy will share his experiences as well from a Forest point of view within the male game. And we're hoping that through those two shared bits of experience that we'll be able to explore, analyse and bring to life the mid-block for you guys tonight. Most of you, or if not all of you, I'm sure are kind of familiar with this platform. There's a lot of webinars kind of out there at the moment under the current situation. So I know you'll have been on it and seen certain features, but I'll just quickly run you through some of those just as a reminder. First of all, you should be able to see the slide deck in front of you with myself, Jimmy and Joe on the side of that. We also have a chat feature, which is on the right-hand side, and we'd really encourage you to use that as much as you possibly can to kind of interact with each other, share your opinions, share your thoughts, share your ideas, and pose any questions that you might have around some of the content that we cover tonight. It's probably worth mentioning at that point that the fourth member of our team is Matty Ramsbotham. He's kind of sitting in the background and he'll be giving us some support on the chat feature. So any questions that you pose, Matty will be filtering some of those through to us, and he'll be offering some support from an IT point of view. So if you're having any kind of visual audio issues, if you just put that on chat, Matty will do his best to help out with that. In terms of questions, we've got a lot of content to cover in the next 90 minutes. Hopefully some of it's going to be some real good stuff for you to think about and consider. We want to obviously prioritise getting through that content, but we will try our best to answer any questions as they do come through. There will be a couple of kind of polls that we'll put up, especially at the start of the webinar as well, just to kind of gauge the audience of who's in the room. So if you could just, spend time filling those in as they pop up, that'll help us certainly from our point of view as presenters. And I guess the last thing and probably most important thing is that, we're all excited for tonight. We're looking forward to this and hopefully it's going to be a great learning opportunity for everybody who's on board and listening in and tuning in tonight. What we'd encourage you to do from a learning experience point of view is to make notes, whether that be mentally, digitally or with pen and paper. So that should bring us to the first poll. So the poll should come up around, do you use the mid-block strategy? If you could just spend some time filling that in, and obviously we'll get a chance to have a look at that and analyse that as your responses do come in. And I'll just talk you through this slide in terms of an overview around how we're going to structure tonight's webinar. So it's three areas really. The first one is we're going to try and kind of explore the England DNA in relation to the England setup from the national team, senior team, all the way through the pathway, unpick some key messages, strategies and tactics in relation to the England setup. Then we're going to start looking at and spending most of our time exploring some case studies. So we've got some footage from kind of Man City and Reading women's teams who set up against Chelsea with a mid-block. So we'll be exploring some of the similarities and differences between how they did that. And then we're going to bring Joe in to talk about his experience and their fantastic FA Cup run that they had last season, where they got through to the fifth round and faced Man City. And Joe will be sharing how he prepared towards that game in terms of setting up their mid-block organisation. And then finally, we're going to have a look at some practice design principles and the thought process behind some practice design, which Jimmy's going to bring to life for us through some sessions that he's delivered at the back end of the webinar. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of how we're going to work things through. As I said, we're excited to take you on this journey. I hope you are too. And we'll just have a look at the poll responses. So at the moment, we've got three different options. So do you use the mid-block as a strategy? Yes, as part of our philosophy is 19%. sometimes as part of our game plan is 75%. So most people, and never as we use other strategies, it's 6%. Jimmy, have you got any thoughts on those responses and the split?
Thanks, Robbie. Interesting split for me, because if I look at it, the one I'm really pleased about is the middle one, sometimes as part of our game plan. Obviously, lots and lots of people on this webinar tonight from different phases of the game. But I'm a massive believer that as you go through those phases, certainly not so much at foundation phase, but wider, youth development phase into professional development phase, are you coaching the players for just one club? Are you coaching the players to be salaried footballers if you're in the academy system? And are you coaching the footballers for fun, really, I suppose, as well? So, my sort of key message here is how much of a menu can you offer your players whilst you're taking them through their coaching journey? And does that menu cover all different types of systems, strategies, tactics, et cetera, because if they were to leave you, if you're in an academy system, for instance, at 16 and they go off to another club, have they got the adaptability to be able to play in different systems? Or are we going to make them all adaptable to, or not adaptable, all one-trick ponies, as I'd call it? So the work out there that you do in the clubs and the fantastic work you do at grassroots and the work that goes on all over the place, then, from my point of view, I think we need to understand that we do need to make the players as adaptable as they can be for future. And it's not always about the one club, it's the what ifs.
Bro, thanks, Jimmy. So just to move on into the presentation, we're gonna show you a video next, and we'd just like you to think about what the mid block means to you in your environment. And Jimmy's just started to talk about context and environment and the places that you work and the players that you coach. So feel free as you watch this video just to share any of your thoughts on the chat around what mid block means to you in your environment with your players. Brilliant. So hopefully that's kind of provoked some thought for you guys sitting at home, just around your context and how that relates to, the age groups, the players that you work with, ability levels, the environment that you work in, whether that be performance or development, and just some questions there on the left-hand side just to start considering as well. But I guess I'll come to you, Joe, first, and based on your experiences of working at Ipswich Town. What does the mid-block mean to you, and what does it look like for you in your environment? And I guess what's really interesting is that comparison between the performance side of things with the senior team, but also then the development pathway that you've got there with the younger age groups in terms of the academy team.
Yeah, I think it varies from a senior perspective, that the current level that we play at. Tactically, we don't have to be as switched on. It's not as challenging, especially being a team that tends to dominate possession quite significantly at that level. So, yeah, we don't really A, face it, and B, have to be too organised without the ball to kind of get it back. And that's just not necessarily because of the level of opposition, but also the quality of the pitches we play on, which also has an effect on that. From an academy perspective, yeah. The teams we play against is a bit more tactically. It's a bit more evident. I think Jimmy alluded to it earlier. The importance of maybe not being too stuck in one particular way, and I think sometimes we might assume that a mid block or a low block is something that's a bit more passive and a bit more defensive. When in actual fact, there's still elements of pressing involved in either of those two strategies, and that will depend on the cues and the triggers and the opportunities you might think to plan an engagement strategy against your opposition.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. And Jimmy, from your perspective, particularly working at Forest, what did mid block look like for you in your environment?
Yeah, well, thanks, lads. A mid block for us was exactly what it says on the screen in terms of, out of possession in the middle third of the pitch. But it was a thing we deployed sometimes to give ourselves a breather in games, and also to actually, stop the opposition coming for us when we played teams that we knew were really good and liked to build and create through the middle third. We used a mid block in terms of trying to show them outside of us. So what we would do is we wanted to basically stop anything coming for us. So, and I know we're going to go on to it later, but show outside of the pitch. So within our system, and it was where we play, and we played sometimes a 4-4-1-1, 4-3-3. It would be that we would look. It would be a ploy to stop the opposition coming through us. And also, it'd be a situation sometimes where we'd just say to the players, look, don't go after the ball, look to slide and screen. And slide and screen to me means that you're going across the pitch, and you're actually, the slide is going across the pitch, left to right, right to left, and the screen is actually stopping the ball going through the thirds into an advanced area of the pitch that would hurt you. So, again, that's how we would see a mid block and what it looked like. Certainly in the times that we worked on it at Forest.
Brilliant. So I guess in kind of combining both your views, Jimmy, and your views, Joe, it's a bit of a combination of stopping forward play, preventing the opposition getting into areas that you don't want them to get into, but also, as you mentioned, Joe, being a bit more proactive in terms of attempts to win the ball back. It's quite interesting that some clubs are working. They talk about this not necessarily being a mid block, but being a mid press, and opportunities of when to go and press and trying to win the ball. And it's trying to get that balance between protecting key spaces and denying forward passing opportunities, but also then what are the opportunities where we can win the ball back. And that's certainly something that we'll start to look at as we go through this webinar. So great, thanks for your thoughts.
I also think as well, just to touch upon that, is that we certainly found that the more we tried to press, the more it affected our in-possession quality. So sometimes it being a rest strategy as well, to a certain extent. And then being able to support being a bit better on the ball by being a bit more difficult to break down, almost, again, gain a bit of time to recover.
Brilliant, great, good. And, you know, just looking at the poll, there's been a couple of polls popped up in terms of the pathway that you work in. So we've got 62% who are working in the male pathway, 11% in female, 23% in both, and 4% in neither. And then from a phase point of view, we've got 15 in the foundation phase, 50% in the youth development, 11 in PDP, and then 25 in the senior game. So we've got quite a good mix across the different audiences. And I guess the question that we would pose to you now is, or the challenge for you is, you know, based on what Jimmy and Joe said, have you got real clarity on what the mid-block looks like and why you do it? And ultimately then, have you got clarity as a coach, but also then the consistency around the clarity with yourself, your staff, and then your players, so that everybody has a shared understanding of what that looks like and what you're actually trying to do with the mid-block if you do use it and when you do use it. So Brill, great. Thanks guys for your input there. So we're going to go to another video. This one's a little bit shorter than the last one. And we're going to ask you to take a look, and then we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail on the next couple of slides some of the key points that you're going to see on there. Great. So I guess from a coach's point of view, we can start to look at breaking the mid block down into two elements. So firstly, kind of setting the blocks, or what kind of individual units in the team does overall when transitioning from that loss of possession into a mid block shape. And then the second element is more around when we actually recover to that shape, what we do when we get into the mid block and having that organised shape. So from an England DNA perspective, there's some key messages that are ran throughout the age phases, and talk about two things in terms of that setting or getting organised: is the delay of the opposition, and also then recovery into team shape. So Jimmy, I guess question for you is, taking those two elements around setting the block in terms of delaying the opposition, but also then the recovery bit. What things would you be looking for from your team to be able to do those things effectively?
Well, a little bit like the graphic shows, Robbie, we would be saying to all of our players, when there's a transition of the ball, that the recovery is a sprint. Everything is a sprint, and there's no ifs or buts. It's, this is what you do. Certainly with the 23s that we did at Forest, everything was a sprint back into shape. Now, as you're sprinting back, it's the awareness of knowing what's going on in the game. So, as Joe's already alluded to, if I'm sprinting back, or the players are sprinting back and got a chance to nick the ball in terms of the press, can they do that? If they can't, what we want them to recover back into shape as quick as possible. Now, when they recover back into shape, what I don't then want them doing is then going after the ball and exposing the team shape. They then need to be patient and just wait and can we get that slide and screen that I talked about before, which will then delay the opposition. So it's recovery runs as sprints. Get back into shape as quick as you can, slide and screen on the way back, be very aware to see if you can nick the ball.
Bro. And then I guess the second part, in terms of actually when you get into that organised shape and getting into the mid block, just again some key messages from the England DNA. is first of all, the game plan will effectively dictate our defensive organisation when out of possession. So whether that's mid block, whether that's low block, or whether that's high press, however we set up should dictate the way that we organise ourselves. And I guess central of that is that consideration of strengths, both from our perspective, from our team, but also then the opposition. That will determine potentially what our game plan is going to look like. And then regardless of the strategy, from an England's perspective, it's about trying to dictate how and where the opposition play. And it's interesting just to note that, a key principle from the England point of view is trying to force the opposition away from goal. And I think that's the next bit that, Jimmy, I'll come again to you around, that decision around whether to force the opposition away from goal as part of our overall strategy, or whether it's forced centrally, is quite a big decision for coaches to make. And, for any coaches making that decision, I don't think it's a case of what's right or wrong, but there might be better and worse based on a few different factors. So what things do you think coaches might need to consider when they actually do come to make that decision around forcing away from goal or forcing inside?
So my first thing on that, Robbie, is, what's the strategy and what? So we had an academy manager, Gary Brazil, at Nottingham Forest, and he wanted the youth development phase and the PDP phase to be showing outside the pitch when we are in that mid block. Reason for that is because we are forcing them away from our goal, and we feel that our strengths are our centre halves in terms of being strong, in terms of competing, the 1v1 duels, heading the ball, clearances. Our fullbacks were, we felt, really, really dynamic. So we would always back them in the foot race, and equally, not only the foot race, because the big thing here is how do they defend? So they're 1v1 duels on the outside, having the people outside of them. We would always back them to come out on top. Certainly 9 times out of 10, we would be happy with that. But if they got round us and broke that, then we think that we've got defenders in there that would put their bodies on the line, be prepared to get hit with the ball, block the ball, etc. But in front of them, you those 2 midfielders and the 4 midfielders really. But what happens is they can keep a compact shape. We don't want them going through us, as I've already explained. Now, there'll be people on this call who will be screaming at the screen, I would imagine, that we show inside, we show inside. What I really want to sort of establish here is that absolutely, it's what's right for your environment. What are your strengths? Our strengths were, we felt we could defend far better by showing people outside than we would allow them to go through us. When people were faced up, the opposition were faced up and running at my centre halves that we had in our group, I don't think that was their strength. When people are faced up and they're running at my 2 wide midfield players and my fullbacks, that was a strength. We had players who could run, who were patient, stayed on their feet, and could do a really good defending job. But a little bit like the graphic says, Robbie, everyone on this call has to consider their strengths. It might be that people who want to show inside have got different kinds of strength in their team, and which is absolutely fine. I'm not here to dictate and tell you what way you should play. As a coach, my game plan has always been to show outside. I think the moment you allow people to come inside the pitch and get a sight at goal, you're actually giving them an opportunity to score. The further you can keep that ball away from your goal, at least you might get a second bite of the cherry. Coming through the middle, they're allowed to pull the trigger and hit the target. You don't know what the outcome will be, and we've seen that in the games just recently. I'm thinking of Mason Mount's goal the other day when he's hit that and it's took a ricochet off of Maguire, I think it was. So yeah, for me, show outside, force the opposition away from goal, exactly as the England DNA says it is, would be how we would beat at Forest whilst I was there in my time.
Jimmy, you spoke a lot there around kind of your own player strengths and capabilities and what they brought to the table in terms of their characteristics. Is there anything that you maybe consider from the opposition that might inform how you do that, or in terms of their capabilities?
Yeah. Again, listen, if you've got someone and you do your homework on the opposition, if you know you've got people that are, midfield players, for instance, who are absolutely outstanding at receiving in little pockets to get the ball, combined with the strikers, then for me, I think you've got to stop that happening. You've got to stop those clever midfield players getting in the pockets to turn up and open you up. Equally, if you've got strikers who are prepared to go in and toe-to-toe and battle, and the ball goes down the middle, straight down the middle at your two centre halves, you've got to consider what the strengths are of the opposition there. And what we're saying is, if we can stop that ball coming down the middle, and we can stop the players who I've identified receiving the ball or getting the ball to them straight away, that gives us a much better chance of dictating the game in a way to how we want it to be, which is again what the graphic says. We want to dictate how the opposition play in a way. We want them to do what we want them to do. So from my point of view, we certainly would consider the strengths of the opposition. Under 23s, did we look at that? Yes, we did. Certainly at senior level, and I've been involved in that as well with first team level. 100% you would definitely look at the opposition's strengths and weaknesses and consider show people. But there's all managers out there are very set in their ways, and this is how we'll play, and this is the way we'll show. We don't worry too much about the opposition. We just worry about what we do. And again, for the people on the call, if you want to do it showing inside, this is using it that way. If you ever get, and I'm sure some of you have come across Martin Thomas, who has been one of the goalkeeping specialists for the FA and for England with the teams, he would tell you absolutely not does he want the opposition coming inside. Always show them outside.
Brilliant. Joe, from your perspective at Ipswich, do you have a preferred strategy in terms of force inside or force away from goal?
No, not particularly. Again, unless we've got significant footage and information on our opposition that can determine strengths and weaknesses. I think we'll probably come to it with what we talk about a bit later on. But yeah, for us, similar to Jimmy, really, if we felt that we were playing against a team that had good players that could find pockets in between lines and could play little reverse passes, then absolutely it would be outside for us. And again, our reasoning for that really is the amount of possibilities there are that you can actually defend the 1v1. You can stop the cross. It might be a mishit cross. It might be a gathered cross from the goalkeeper. And if you've got centre halves again that can compete and head it and hook it, there's kind of like 5 or 6 layers then to preventing a possible goal scoring opportunity.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, guys, for your thoughts. So just going to show you another video, and we're going to start moving into the case studies now. So last video of the webinar, we're going to show you some footage from Man City and Chelsea women playing against, Man City versus Chelsea, and then Reading versus Chelsea women. And both teams are set up to play with a mid-block. And I guess what we're going to ask you to do is just watch the video, try and pick out some of the key detail from that video. So initially, we've got Man City against Chelsea. So you're watching Man City in the light blue against Chelsea in the dark blue. And just what do you see? What do you notice in terms of their organisation? And we will have some stills at the back end of this video that we'll start to look at in a little bit more detail. And the next bit of footage will be Reading in the blue and white playing against Chelsea in the yellow. So again, what do you see from a mid-block perspective in terms of how they're organised as a team in units and individually? Again, feel free to use the chat to share your observations with others and bounce off each other. What do you see? And then back into the Man City versus Chelsea game. And again, start looking at what Man City do here in terms of setting traps and how they look to win the ball back. And it's interesting, we've had a question through on the chat around, how do you implement a mid-block while still maintaining an effective threat? I think it's quite interesting just to go back to Joe's point around this not necessarily just being a passive setup about trying to win the ball, but also then what we do when we win the ball to try and expose the opposition. And last bit of footage, just going back into the Chelsea versus Reading game. What are some of the key things that the individual players are doing and collectively to try and organise themselves effectively? And also, again, setting traps to try and win the ball back. Brilliant. So just a couple of stills. We've got a couple of slides, and on each of those slides, we've got two stills that hopefully there'll be some comparisons between the two setups from Man City's perspective and from Reading's perspective, and different team shapes that they've got out of possession there in the mid block. But I guess from whatever team shape that you adopt and however you organise that mid block, the principle of being compact is huge and it's massively important. So, whether that be across the pitch horizontally, but also up and down the pitch vertically, is going to have a massive effect on how successful you are within that mid block. Jimmy, just, regardless of what the formation that you play, because I'm guessing the coaches on the webinar tonight will play a range of formations. Regardless of what formation you play, is there any key technical, tactical detail that you think's important to be successful in being compact and trying to stop the opposition playing through you?
Yeah, I think in terms of stopping them playing through you, I think when you're doing a mid block, what happens sometimes is I see teams doing mid block, but they're in a hurry to win the ball back. And I know there's been a question here tonight about if you was 1-0 down. If I was 1-0 down, I wouldn't be employing a mid block. I'd be going after the ball and pressing. That would be my answer to that. But if I'm doing this now, so basically, the team needs to be back in shape, as we talked about already. Then we're talking about patience, and we're talking about showing one way. So when we're showing one way, which way are we showing? So, for instance, in the top clip as I'm looking at it, and everyone else is looking at it, I want this ball to come out to the widest player, the widest Chelsea player. And what I'd say is that your body shape there. So, for me, body shape is huge, because the body shape will then start to dictate where you want that player to play the ball. So not only that, are you on your front foot to defend? So rather than be on your heels, if you're on the front foot, you might take the opportunity to go in and nick it. Once you've shown them outside and you're on the front foot, what you've got to do then is look for the cues and triggers of the person that's on the ball. So if he or she, in this particular she, starts to lift her arm up and pull her, like in terms of a kicking foot, a striking foot, once it starts to come back behind her shoulder, she's about to play the pass. So can you be ready to pounce on that ball and just, go and win the ball back as you can? So in terms, for me, it's about the delay, the deny, and the dictator game. It comes into it all the time. But don't be in a hurry. And then if you're in a hurry, what happens to the rest of the team? Because once they break you, you're all of a sudden very, very vulnerable. So stick to the team shape, stick to your guns, and be very patient whilst you're doing this mid-block.
And how important are things like angles and distances with that, Jimmy? And what do the players need to understand about those angles and distances to be able to do it effectively?
Yeah, angles and distances are huge. And I think really, even when I talk about body shape, I touch on that because all of a sudden with your body shape, you're making an angle and distance. So, if we look at the top one again, the striker at the top who's at the top of the mid block, if she goes to press and her angles and distances are wrong, then all of a sudden they get the opportunity to play through you. So your distances between each other, again, coaches in my time, I've heard coaches talk about 11 yards apart. Everyone, certainly the two banks of 4, 11 yards apart, 44 yards. That's the penalty area width. That all of a sudden, still gives them opportunity to play through you. I would look at maybe 8 or 9 yards apart in the slide and screen. The angle of approach, which would then get them to dictate the play. So the angle of the approach that you're going to the ball would dictate the play to the opposition. And also when you're going of an angle of approach, don't overcommit that they can just step by you, which I've already sort of alluded to. And once they step by you, all of a sudden they've broken you. So, your tactic or your strategy is all of a sudden broken down.
Joe, any thoughts from you? Anything to, different from Jimmy in terms of considerations in terms of delivering the mid block effectively with your players?
Yeah, very much taking the decisions and position off the front player, really. And if we're talking about a team that play a single centre forward, I think the concentration aspect and the ability to anticipate those real finer details from the goalkeeper or centre half to whoever's in possession is really, really key. And like Jimmy said, it can really be a domino effect if it's not done right, because your whole game plan could be out the window, because if you can't make the ground up, then you can't affect the player. If your angles, if you overcompensate, again, you allow the centre half to get in it. And one thing I think we've come across that can be quite common as well is that if your number 10's picking up a position to try and affect the deepest midfield player, if you're encouraging to play down one side, and your centre forward doesn't narrow off well enough, and the ball can be switched out, I think your opposite wide player's in a bit of a difficult decision then, because they're thinking, should I go and affect that centre half now? And if they don't, and they don't see it quick enough, and they give the opportunity for the opposite centre half to step in, again, you're in a lot of trouble there if they can really step into the game and dictate the play.
And from your experiences, we often talk about compactness in terms of being horizontally compact across the pitch. I think what you're starting to touch on a little bit around that vertical compactness, a little bit between units as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one thing, something we use quite a lot at club is the players, usually the defenders, being the eyes and the ears the eyes of the players in front, and how they communicate the information, because that can make a whole lot of difference. We might give some principles and some clear information to what we want our front players to do, but we need those leadership qualities from the players behind to be the eyes, because in the game now, where there can be so many different rotations and things can change in games, we have to be able to adapt. And I think if the players behind can't communicate that also doesn't help the players higher up the pitch.
Brilliant point.
Robbie, I think it's really important. I think it's really important as well to emphasise that it's the players on the pitch that make the decisions in the end as well. So I talked about being on the front foot, ready to intercept, and you're not going to discourage your players to try and intercept the ball. But if you go back to the principles of out of possession, and cover is one of those principles. So what you've got to do is, if that centre back, for instance, again, I'm going on the top still, if the centre back wants to go into the centre forward and try and nick the ball, intercept the ball, what's the fullback doing, the right fullback, and what's the left-sided centre half doing in terms of that? So, I don't want to take, and I'm sure Joe's the same and you're the same, I don't want to take the decision making away from the players, because that's hugely important and part of their learning. But what what are the? I think I mentioned what are the cues and triggers then that would make sure that we have cover and we have balance once that does happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, bro, great. So just looking at the next part, and we've started to unpick there a little bit more detail around that compactness and the success factors, I guess, that to be able to do that efficiently and effectively as a team. We just start looking now a little bit more at setting traps. So the opportunities from a mid block to try and create situations where we can actually win the ball back. So whether that be kind of setting traps, like I said, forcing play into certain areas of the pitch, isolating certain players, this would all form hopefully part of a game plan. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into Joe's piece. We don't know the game plan. We aren't managers. We're not involved in the teams at this point in time. But Joe, based on your knowledge, and I know you keep a big dossier on different teams in the higher leagues within the women's tier system, is there anything that would suggest to you in terms of how Chelsea play that both teams have set up a mid block and tried to force inside? Is there anything in particular that you think that both teams might have identified?
I think if we're looking at Chelsea and Manchester City in particular, the top still, I think both Millie Brighton and Steph Houghton of both clubs are pretty good at stepping in and getting tight to players that maybe drop in to find a little pocket. And they're both good at intercepting it to then play forwards. I think the clips also showed as well the position of the deepest midfield player, that sometimes encouraging it to play into that particular area to feed, and having the deepest midfield player almost double defending and try and step in that way and try and nick it. Again, it's a trap that's quite evident, I think, among both teams.
Yeah, and the difference is obviously isolating the bottom clip, isolating the fullback in that instance, and then in the top clip is isolating the centre half, but both effectively still trying to encourage that pass inside. And I just wonder whether, from a player capabilities point of view, if they tried to isolate Beth England a little bit, who's the number 9, who the ball is going to be reaching, and have identified the back to goal, maybe she can't look after the ball as much. If you look at the players around Beth England, so if you look at the top still, and you look at the player, I think it's Kira Walsh, who's next to the referee. She's potentially, and Jill Scott, who's lower down, potentially in a position to back tackle if it does go into Beth England. And then on the bottom still, you've got Rachel Furness, who's just in on the halfway line again. If the ball is played there, to go and apply pressure by back tackling or back pressing. So we're surmising here. We're estimating. We're not basing this on anything because we haven't put that game plan together. But there might be things that could be considered by those teams to formulate that game plan in particular. And Jimmy, just looking at the detail there, the two stills in terms of similarities and differences, in terms of how they've set up, is there anything that, for the coaches at home that you think is worth pointing out in terms of some of the detail?
Well, I think if you look at the top still, the striker who's going towards the ball, the lady that's on the ball now, just the body shape. So, there's no going back there. So that's when I talk about slowing down and being patient, because you've got them where you want them. In terms of, look at, the still, you can't see it brilliantly, but look at the player's eyes. Where are the players looking? The right fullback for Man City on the top still, she's pointing now, so she's aware, she's making her teammate be aware of what's going on. Other players' eyes are looking to the ball. I think that's Steph already on the front foot, making sure that she's ready to go and intercept. In terms of connectivity with the players, I think they're in a really good compact shape in order to go and, when it is being dictated, and that is the game plan. As we say, we didn't put these game plans together. So can they go and nick the ball? And is this a game plan that they use all the time because they want to play into someone who they don't think is as competent as holding the ball up as maybe some of the other female players? And in the bottom still, for me, I think, it's a great example of, you've already alluded to it, you're isolating the fullback. And now really, where does she go? Already you've got, if I look at and put put a line down the pitch, going, from one goal to the other. I think nearly all the Reading players are in 4 lanes of the pitch, so they're making the pitch compact. They even go in a bit tighter and make it even more compact. So could you shuffle across a little bit more? I think what you spoke about earlier on, Robbie, and Joe, was about the back tackling. And I think that's a real skill to teach young players at a young age, because I think when you're coaching players, once the ball's gone past them and they're defending, they sometimes turn off. So what is it? Can you be aware of what's behind your shoulder? And once that ball's gone past your shoulder, turn your hips quickly and go. And then it's a little bit, can you go around, can you back tackle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting just looking at them in terms of the similarities. There's almost 2 funnels created, isn't there? And they're trying to say through the angles and distances that they've got between us that we want you to play into this area. And the combination of those players in those units to be able to do that, although it looks slightly different in different areas of the pitch, slightly wider in the clip below and more central in the clip above, there's some real similarities in terms of the distances and the shape that they pick up to be able to force that inside pass. So Joe, just to come to you now, and obviously we've had a little look there at Man City, and we've had a look at Reading and how they set up against Chelsea, and Man City as the example is a brilliant chance to bring your story to life, I guess, and introduce your fantastic FA Cup round run that you got to the 5th round and played Man City, and that journey that you had last season, which must have been great to be part of. So to just get us going, I guess it would be great, before we talk about the Man City game and the build towards that Man City game, is just give us a little bit around the context that you've got at Ipswich, because it's quite unique in some ways, isn't it, in terms of the senior team that you've got there and also then the academy setup.
It is, yeah, and it all come to life around 3 years ago now, and I think the FA kind of recognised that there was a hotbed of talent in the East region that didn't really have an elite pathway post 16. And I think Lauren Hemp was probably a good example of someone that's from Norfolk and has had to kind of move away to Bristol and then Manchester to continue her development. So a new initiative was set up with the Ipswich Town awarded the partnership, and we launched our WSL Academy that we've now competed in for 2 years, and have been really successful with developing players across the national pathway. It is a bit of a unique case because our senior team that's much more aligned now is playing Tier 4. So we made a kind of decision that was really good for the benefit of the players over the last sort of 18 months now to start to move our players into that senior setup from our academy into our seniors, and a lot of them now have been competing at a very young age at that senior level.
And you had quite a few that kind of combine across both teams, haven't you, in terms of the training and how you've got that set up and how you organise your training sessions and your weekly training plan? Yeah,
we did. And again, because we found we were using some of our academy players to play senior football. And again, a great opportunity to develop. And, we have the luxury of playing on some really nice pitches at some nice training grounds on a Wednesday against, the likes of Arsenal, Manchester City and Chelsea. Sometimes it's really good experience for these young players to go and play Tier 4 football on a Sunday on pitches that aren't as great against real seasoned, experienced women that have been playing at that sort of level that know all the kind of dark arts and tricks of the trade, and a good opportunity to also identify some things that they can develop playing at that level as well.
Brilliant. And then your FA Cup run. So yeah, a lot of games there, Joe. To get to that game that you played against Man City, that must have been some journey. Just give us a little bit of an overview of how that panned out for you last season.
Yeah, so from a senior perspective, I think it's no secret that our academy players, we have so many internationals within our provision. Even at the moment, we've got 19 international players from youth age groups out of the 2 squads of 30 players. So we know that at kind of the senior level we're playing at, we've got some really good players that are really effective and can make a real impact. And yeah, the journey to round 5 was comfortable in some ways. There was a lot of games that we were really in control and we dominated, and that's kind of been something we've been used to, if I'm honest, over the last sort of 18 months. I think again, the quality of players we have under our provision, it's no surprise that we do dominate possession, and we real gain some momentum and can win games convincingly. And I think there were probably 1 or 2 games amongst that run that were really competitive. I think the Portsmouth game was a really competitive game, and equally the Huddersfield scoreline was probably looked a bit handsome on our part. I think it probably didn't tell the full picture. And yeah, it was a great experience playing some clubs in different regions and kind of making that journey to round 5.
And it's interesting you're saying there, and just not just on the bit that you've spoke there for the last kind of minute or so, but previously around, how you were predominantly set up and how you were predominantly play and experience quite a lot of possession and dominate against teams. And I guess when you came up against Man City in that 5th round, when the tie was announced, that might look slightly different for you. And then all of a sudden there's some different considerations for you in terms of how you actually will set up to play against them. So yeah, I guess that's a good point just to talk about that consideration process around, right, it's been announced that we're going to play against Manchester City. What do we do now?
Yeah, and a real challenge. I mean, again, like I said, we've kind of been quite dominant in all due respect over quite a significant period. And when you're so committed to a particular way of playing and you kind of, again, dominate games, like I said, it's then, with this enormous tie, having to find the right balance really, and do you stick to what you've kind of ingrained into your club? It's been quite successful over 18 months, but recognising that the quality and level of opponent and being a bit more realistic in terms of what we can actually impact. I think psychologically is a real challenge, because we've got a real good culture at our football club in terms of the core sort of behaviours that we have, and we have players that have unquestionable belief, a no fear approach, and really committed to what our vision looks like. And again, we don't really want to take that away. And we knew that how enormous the task was, but we played with no fear and unquestionable belief for 18 months, and that's something you can't just now switch off and go for a jolly up, because you're there to try and compete and try and win the game effectively. Physically, I think if we look at that, we're a team full of, I think, 8 of our starting 11, 7 in fact, were under 18. So from a physical perspective, and we wouldn't have competed against a team like that before, that are well experienced, full of international athletes. So we knew that would be a real challenge in how we would plan to again implement a strategy. And I also think from a tactical perspective, like I said earlier, you come away from what you've kind of been doing for quite a significant amount of time. And if you're going to plan something a little bit different, we've now got 2 weeks from the draw to prepare tactically for a game against one of the best teams in Europe. So that was a real challenge as well. And I think, when we kind of come to the decision to set up in a mid to possibly low block, it's probably 8 weeks work minimum really, and we're able to try and get all this into 2 weeks. So that was something that was also a challenge as well.
Yeah, and I know
Joe.
Go on,
Sorry, Robbie.
Yeah, go on, Jim.
I was just going to say, how were the girls? How did the girls feel about the fact that you wanted to operate this? Was it a decision by all of you, by the girls, by you, by the management team? How did that come about, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so we when we planned for this, we kind of looked at what resources and opportunities we had. So I'll just come to that in a minute, but also looking at, we've got a great relationship with the staff at the football club. So we sought advice from the men's manager, some other coaches amongst the football club, and they've been really supportive of our journey. So it was interesting to get a kind of an idea of where their thoughts were. As a staffing, we discussed that, and it was something we discussed with players. And whilst the players are chomping at the bit to try and go toe to toe, they did recognise the level, and I think again having so many players within the England pathway as well, and them understanding the demands physically, and they acknowledging where some of the seniors are at, will help them understand what it is we can actually be capable of and what we can impact. So it wasn't something that was difficult. I think when we come to terms of it, it was how do we say damage limitation, but how do we try and stay in the game as long as possible? And how do we try and impose ourselves as well? Because again, we were there ultimately to try and get through. And if we wasn't, like I said, there wouldn't be no point in going.
Great.
No, thank you.
And we'll talk about later on what that 2-week preparation phase looked like. But I guess the question I'd like to ask now is just around, based on the news that you played Man City, based on all those considerations that you talked about, and based on some opposition analysis of what you've seen of Man City, you came to that decision around, right, we're going to play mid-block. What were the key tactical considerations? I know you've got 3 or 4 that you want to talk us through. What were the key tactical considerations for you to be able to do that effectively?
Yeah, so I think we'd mix between a 4-3-3 and a 3-5-2 throughout our season anyway. Sometimes we'd play with like central 4 players and a centre forward. One of our 16-year-old centre forwards scored a hat-trick in the previous tie. And had been playing really well, and we wanted to start her, but one of our experienced players was also a centre forward and was really good aerially. So we wanted to try and get both in the team, which is why we went with the front 2. Ultimately, we wanted to ensure, in simplest terms, that we weren't played through. I think I touched upon it earlier, where we wanted to try and encourage play down wide areas. And a difficult decision we made, we actually played our really effective wide players at wing backs. We recognise that defensively, 1v1, they may not be as competent as our fullbacks, but they were our quickest 2 players. And we felt with the threat of Manchester City in wide areas, and if that was something that we were going to encourage them to play, we wanted to try and physically be able to compete as well as possible. So we went with 2 wide players as wing backs for that reason. And equally, if there was an opportunity to establish possession and try and create something ourselves, then we wanted to try and get a lot out of our wing backs from an attacking perspective as well. So, yeah, that was kind of our thoughts behind that. We tinkered it with some academy games, and after our planning and making that decision, we decided to actually utilise some of our academy games to implement that strategy, to get some learnings from that we can then deliver to our players, and we got some really good bits out of that. And we were really fortunate where we brought our under-18 boys in for a game that we played, which allowed us really to try and again be uncomfortable with the speed in which they would play at, because we knew game day against Manchester City we were going to be playing against a speed of play that we hadn't been used to before. So we got some really good work out with our boys as well, and they were great for us because they gave us a bit of an insight into how quickly the game was potentially going to be.
I know you spoke about something that you'd observed with their midfield rotation, especially down the right hand side with Georgia Stanway and Jill Scott, and if you could talk us through what you saw and what you tried to do to counteract that.
Yeah, so I think out of possession, a lot of the footage we'd seen was very much 4-4-2, and Jill Scott had played the right side of a midfield 4. And what tended to happen was they were playing Georgia Stanway as a right fullback at the time that would offer them maximum width and would play quite high up the pitch, which meant that Jill Scott tended to roll inside a little bit and almost made like a midfield 3. So that was something that we'd kind of identified, and one of the key things that we considered with planning was we wanted as much as possible keep our shape. We felt that was really key. We were aware that sometimes we might have to lock on and try and match up, but we wanted to keep our shape as much as possible. And like I said before, the communication aspect was really important to that. I think whilst we tried to recognise what some of the patterns might be, ultimately we had to adapt where necessary. And whilst, again, we were kind of happy with what we think we might be up against. Ultimately, you've got to play the game, and decisions might change. So one thing, we kind of recognised that the wide player tended to roll inside, and Georgia Stanway occupied that kind of area, and Ellen White tended to make those forward runs in those channels, particularly on the right hand side, having known that Jill Scott would potentially leave that free.
And so what was the key bits of information that you gave your players in just trying to deal with that situation as Jill Scott did start to roll in and Georgia Stanway tried to get a little bit higher in the wide position? What things did you talk about with your players to support them in?
Yeah, so as I think this visual shows now with the goalkeeper in possession, we wanted to ensure that we weren't going to touch the back two at that stage, and we wanted our front two to kind of slide and screen Kira Walsh playing as the 4. And we knew it wasn't actually Jill Scott who played in that position, but we knew that if that player rolled inside, it would be the 11 effectively passing on the 3. One of our biggest challenges, and we had this in the previous round, was our wing backs, particularly when play was switched out, whether they felt they could go and jump the opposition fullback or wide player. In this instant here, if we're looking at our number 11 as that wing back, there might be times when if the ball went to the right-sided centre-half and it looked like it was going to the right full-back, that she could go and jump that. But as much as possible, again, we wanted to try and keep our shape as a back 5. And I think the next slide shows what it kind of looks like with the engagement line. So if we played a midfield 3, and the outside players of our midfield 3 were the players that were going to go and try and affect the opposition fullbacks. And again, it's trying to keep a back 5 really as much as possible. And again, one of the biggest things we tried to work on really is we never wanted them to play in kind of channels 2 or 4 or 3. It was always either turn back and switch it back out and we slide across, or they play down that channel. And I think this visual shows it quite well, where I think if it's played in the channel, it was important we've done a bit of work with our 6 in trying to go contact with the centre forward, and recognise if there wasn't sufficient pressure on the ball that they'd have to drop. But we wanted to try and go contact, and we wanted to try and affect a forward run. And again, in that instant, the goalkeeper's position would be really important in that as well.
Joe, sorry, Robbie, again. A number of questions have come up from people over the night as I'm looking through it as well, and exactly what you've just been saying there, that channels 1, channels 5, you're happy for them to go into, or that's your preferred sort of situation. And a number of people on the call tonight have put the ball over the top and they're in, but that's where you want your 6 in terms of this, where this still is, your 6, 2 and 5 to be ready on the front foot as such, in order to cover and balance, I'm assuming, looking at this still and actually being ready to pick it off and hopefully read the trigger.
Yeah, and I think if the next slide shows that, I think it shows with the back 5 then. Sorry, that one was around awareness, and I'll come to that question in a minute. There it is. And yeah, just dictating play. I think that the back 5, they were playing a bit deeper and recognising that if there wasn't sufficient pressure on the ball, then they were ready to drop off. And again, I said it earlier around the anticipation and the concentration aspect. And that was something that I'll come to in terms of our learnings, is that spending so much time without the ball, that was a real challenge in being able to concentrate and anticipate so regularly. And I think that slide shows it quite well there, that we wanted if the ball was going to be played over the top, we wanted to try and make contact. We felt that with quick wing backs, we could try and physically compete for that, and there were elements of times when we did. And yeah, it was paramount for us that they weren't going to play through us. They weren't going to play into channels 2, 3 or 4. It was either going to be over the top or wide.
I'll just go back to the awareness and doing 2 jobs as well, Joe, and just unpick that a little bit.
Yeah, so this slide here from the previous one shows them when maybe 7 does stay out wide. And again, it's passing players on. And whilst we wanted our centre forwards in that instant there, if 2 goes to play to Kira Walsh as the 4, the 10 could potentially nick it that side. But equally, our 8 almost being aware of that player as well. And also trying to screen. I don't think we've got the angles particularly right, because I know it was actually animated where you could see all the movements. But again, in answer to probably some of the learners' questions, that we wanted to ensure that in that instant there, our 8 could potentially screen a pass into a front player. And I think that probably helps the decision making of the centre halves in knowing that actually that pass might be prevented now by the screening midfield player. So I know the only decision is going to go wide or over the top, and that helps. It helps with their triggers a little bit as well.
And I think when you're starting to talk about awareness from that point of view, Joe, it's about knowing what's in front of you and what's behind you, and being able to get your positioning right to be able to affect both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I touched upon it earlier, where there's lots of rotations, and it was really important we kept our shape and we recognised when we needed to pass players on, and when responsibility shifted, and being aware and trying to do 2 jobs really, and whether it be the centre half protecting the spacing behind, or going and locking on and trying to defend and force play backwards if it's played into the centre forward's feet. And that was one of our key messages really, is really recognising, trying to do 2 jobs as much as possible.
Oh, brilliant. I guess the next bit then is based on all of those different kind of technical, tactical considerations, in line with the opposition that you were going to be playing against, is what did that 2 weeks look like? I know you've already spoke a little bit about some of the games that you put in place to try and prepare your players, but just a little bit more around how did you try and embed those key messages across those 2 weeks?
Yeah, so one of the biggest focuses for us was to try and, again, be uncomfortable with the speed of play, and then have an opportunity to experience what our game day strategy looked like. Some of the key details around that was from a psychological perspective, really, in terms of being really switched on and being able to concentrate for large amount of periods of the game, which is something that would be new to us as well, considering we're a team that tended to have a lot of possession. One of the things we really tried to work on is trying to secure the ball upon a turnover. If we did have opportunities where we could engage it and win the ball, is what next. And that was something I think we found quite most difficult. And one of the biggest things I took away from the game is I really underestimated how difficult it is to actually secure and keep the ball when you've spent so much time without it. But that was something we wanted to try and work on. We felt it was key that there was, upon a turnover, there was real visual support, and we didn't want to isolate players when they won it. I think from the boys, again, like I said, they really challenged us physically. I think there was other things that affected the prep a little bit, which was kind of a good thing. But as an example, I think I said earlier, but our centre forward, only 16, scored a hat trick in the previous round. And one thing that we kind of expected was the media frenzy around what was going on. And how overwhelming that whole period was, not just for us as staff, but also players. Because if we're asking players to, really concentrate and anticipate and put them in uncomfortable positions on the pitch, and we've had the media in all evening, and there's been interviews galore and cameras, and that can sometimes take its toll a little bit. And don't get me wrong, whilst we all enjoyed it and it was great exposure for our football club, it also takes its toll a little bit when you're not full-time set up anyway. Your time you've got with your players is precious. Over a 2-week spell to try and get out as much as you can and you feel is necessary, but also there's so many outside influences as well.
So just on that one, John, the timescales in mind, and obviously you spend a lot of time on the pitch trying to drill down into some technical, tactical detail that would help you to perform this effectively and execute a game plan that was a bit unfamiliar to your team and your players. Is there anything that you did away from the pitch to try and further embed messages in terms of whether it be classroom sessions or sharing of information with them that wasn't necessarily just on the pitch?
Yeah, we do a lot of that anyway. I mean, we brief before every session, and we're pretty good at staff in terms of technology. And now how we show footage and painted up clips and animations on Keynote with our sessions. So that's something we've been pretty good at anyway. And I kind of think that worked in our favour a little bit, that the players didn't feel like we were changing our approach. because again, the quality of our work I think is pretty good as a multidisciplinary staff. So it wasn't anything extra we did. I think we cover all bases week by week anyway with the work we do. And again, it was just the whole media frenzy really was something that was a bit different for us. And again, the only new thing we did was play a game against the boys, which I've already spoken about.
Brilliant. So I guess you've started to touch on these a little bit, but your key learnings as a coach, after that fixture and after the performance and reflections on the mid block in particular around how it actually played out in the game.
Yeah, so I think the key learnings really was being able to mentally sustain the details. I think that support the game strategy, and it was a great experience for us. And for the first 20 minutes, we didn't have much of the ball. Manchester City in control, but we were quite happy with our shape. We were quite happy with the kind of performance we were putting in, and we kind of recognised really for us to try and have some sort of success in the game, we needed to try and hang on as long as possible in that state really, and see if it challenged Man City and how they adapted or potentially frustrated. Again, for 20 minutes, really good. We looked organised. We felt that there were lots of crosses. Some we dealt with, some we didn't, but it was 0-0 after 20 minutes, and we were quite happy. I think from a coach's perspective, one of my key learnings was we actually intercepted a pass. So I spoke earlier about our wing backs being usually quite aggressive in trying to jump opposition players, and we actually intercepted a pass, and our wing back broke forward and got away from Georgia Stanway, and Steph Orton conceded a corner, and we had a corner at about 20 minutes at 0-0 that I think for me personally was a big learning, because we'd been pretty good from corners, and whilst we'd done so much work in preparing, if I'm honest, I got a bit excited, and I kind of took my eyes off the ball in terms of what was happening away from the corner. And that was something I was quite disappointed with, because again, we are so organised usually. We put a lot of detail into our work, and we'd got a bit mixed up with the two that we'd kept back. In terms of when they then broke from the corner that we had, we probably had the wrong player that went to go and engage the clearance. Because she was our quickest one, and we'd have probably preferred her to stay back, and it ended up being played through, and we couldn't recover quick enough, and it was 1-0. So that, from my perspective, that was something I really took away from that. In terms, again, this is not to say that we'd have gone on to win the game had we not conceded that, but up until that moment, we looked okay. Again, we didn't have much of the ball, but I was fairly happy with the strategy we'd put in place, and again, we conceded lots of possession. But I was kind of happy. I think there were other things that I probably underestimated. Was we gradually went into a low block. I think the front two fouled again through no fault of their own. Physically, I think the demand of trying to get us up the pitch a little bit probably played a bit too deep. And I think there were opportunities throughout the game where maybe we didn't make the most of throw-ins or free kicks or goal kicks to try and get a bit more of a breather, to try and get us up the pitch a little bit. And I think the further back we got, the more players they were able to commit forward. And then it was only a matter of time then we started to concede some goals.
There's a great question came in from one of the coaches, Joe, and it was, would you play the same way if you played Man City again next week? So particularly around the mid block that you set up, is there anything would you do it exactly the same? Is there anything that you would tinker with and change?
It's a really good question, actually. Probably not. And I think it's something that, again, whilst I said earlier about as a football club, we have fantastic belief. Our players are fearless in how they play, and they really thrive on that, and they're an exciting group to watch. I think one thing that was quite evident that the gulf in quality, in experience, in physicality, it is so huge. And I don't think enough probably recognise that at the start. Whilst we believed and we tried and do everything possible to try and progress into the next round. the golf was absolutely huge, and I think that the physical mismatch was really evident, and that's no one's fault. That's again, we're playing 7 outfield players out of your 10 outfield players that are under the age of 18. You know, physically we were no match, and sometimes you can put your strategy in place and you can emphasise the finer details, but if you can't compete physically, it does really make it difficult.
Jim, I don't know whether there's any other questions from you or.
No, to be fair, Joe, it's a brilliant insight, and you know, I think that point that you've hit on the last, you know, the physicality of the girls, 10 under 18s outfield players against, you know, senior, you know, well documented international footballers of Man City. What I would say is what a great experience for the girls, and one I'm sure they'll take with them for many years. But equally, one that I hope that they've taken a lot of learning from as well. You know, and you as knowing you and speaking to you as we have done, the reflecting part of it for you as a coaching staff, but also for the girls on their journey. You know, I'm not wanting your girls to leave your football club, but 1 or 2 of them could end up at Man City at some point. So, you know, what a great experience for you all as a club, and, you know, a brilliant, it's probably, you know, the FA Cup, it's a fairy tale, and it's a fairy tale for you guys to have got where you got to.
It was, yeah. And again, in answer to the question earlier, I think had the game been at home on a wet and cold, windy day at Felixstowe, may have meant that we might have been able to maybe nick a few more passes. And we spoke earlier about, you know, double defending and trying to be in the position where you might, because on our pitch, you know, in all due respect, we might be able to nick a few more bobbled passes. But yeah, and I think, you know, it was a great experience. And one thing that I take a lot of value from at the end of the game in socialising with some of the staff and players was actually we'd had such a good run, and we'd been in such good form over the course of 2 years that we were probably too much of a risk to take lightly. And I know the team that Manchester City put out at the time, you know, was, whilst I think Ellen White and Jill Scott on the bench, you know, they had Demi Stokes, Kira Walsh, Steph Fulton, Lauren Hemp as a wide player, Georgia Stanway. You know, they were playing players that had only played in the World Cup semi-final, 8 9 months earlier. So they weren't in a position to take a risk. They'd done their due diligence. They'd done their own work on us. And yeah, we take a lot of pride from that, knowing that we weren't taken lightly. You know, I think that shows the class of them, the fact that they took us seriously, and they were relentless. And we've taken a lot away from that, knowing that, you know, we've got a lot to do now to try and bridge the gap, because we've actually experienced what world class looks like firsthand, and we're now having to up our game, because we need to try and do more if we're going to try and compete with that level over the next 4 or 5 years.
Brill, thanks, George.
Also, sorry, Robbie. Just
no, go on, Jim.
Last thing. Also, it's for the girls to see that, isn't it? If that's where they want to end up, Joe, you know, that's the kind of there's a lot to go for them now, but they've seen it at first hand, and you just said it. That's what world class looks like. What a great aspiration for those young women to sort of aspire to, really.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And it's a fascinating insight, and it's great listening to it, Joe. And, you know, thanks for unpicking the detail and relating it back to the mid block. And, you know, I'm sure the coaches at home will have picked up a lot from hearing your insights about it. So thanks for sharing. Just to move on to the last segment, and we've got Jimmy's going to come in and talk about a practice that he put together and delivered. And I think before we actually go into that practice, and Jimmy gives his thoughts and or gives insights into his thought process behind that practice, it'd probably just be good to give some context around it, Jimmy, in terms of who it was delivered to, when it was delivered, and stuff like that.
Yeah, this was the lads that I had, the 23s I had at Forest, and it was a session. You know, we don't operate a mid block as a set thing to do, but we do use it occasionally. So it was working, you know, with the 11, 9 and 7 and the 10, 4 and 8 as midfield players. And we were looking in terms of trying to get them to understand what it looked like in live situations, rather than just paint a picture on a board. We wanted them to go through it. We wanted them to practice. Now, this would have also been done to start with at a very low level, Robbie. So this would be an afternoon session for us after we'd done a morning session around other things that we were looking at. So I'd take these particular players out in the afternoon. Chris Cohen, who was my assistant, would be working with some of the other players. And really, session starts like it looks there. 6 has the ball play. Okay, so what do we do now? We want to play in that area that's sort of coned off there. And the idea about having the goals in the middle of the pitch as such, rather than having on the edges of pitches, we don't want to be penetrated through the middle of the goal. So, I'm to receive the ball, end up being at the pitch either on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. So that's lanes 1 and lanes 5, as Joe and I have referred to tonight. That would be what we would do. Also, once that becomes live, Robbie, the 3 lads have got to make a decision. So if we're talking about compactness, or let's talk about press first, because that's the first one on the principles of defending. Now, can they go and press the ball? If they would go and press the ball, why would they do it? Okay. And then we start to look at what I'd like them to do. And you, hopefully everyone at home can see what I've written down on the side there about, okay, we're not going to press. So now we're going to stay compact. So the 11 and the 7 would look to come inside the pitch somewhat and look to get closer to the 9. And again, we talked about the angles and distances earlier on. Once the 4 and the 8, because we allow the 4 and the 8 to drop to receive the ball. Why do we do that? Because we're dictating the game. So I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to let the 4 and 8 in the reds get the ball. So we then look at staying compact. And that's when we start to look at the slide and screen that I talked about earlier on. But don't commit. So just be patient of the sliding and the screening. And the 10, the 8 and the 4 behind are always looking to be on the front foot, looking to see where they may be able to nick it and intercept. So we're looking to show outside at every opportunity we can. And I've also put down there, don't dive into the one. Again, I've already highlighted that this evening. As soon as you go and commit to the tackle and you dive in and they break you, you're a man down. You're a person down on the pitch. So I want us to be comfortable to just be patient, basically. Okay. So I need voice from behind the midfield players into the front 3. Show them outside, stay on your feet, be patient, step in, go on, now you can go and win it. All those kind of things. The communication is really, really important. But above all, I really want them to be patient. And I think for everyone on the call, to ask players sometimes to be patient when they want to go and win the ball back. The 9 in this particular session for me is such a great lad. He will run through brick walls for me, for Chris, for the football club, for his teammates. And at times we had to put the reins on him and stop him from doing that. So it was about getting him to be patient and just hold his time when the right time was to be pressed, to press. The reason I put be brave there is you're letting the opposition have the ball. And that's not a good feeling. When the opposition have the ball, players get a little bit fretful. I think coaches on the touchline get a little bit fretful. Go and win it back, go and win it back. No, let the opposition have it. As long as you're compact and you're in shape, be brave. Be brave enough to let the opposition keep the ball. I would be interested to say to the 100-odd people that are on this call tonight, the next time you get the chance from open play, just all of a sudden get your players to slow down a bit, to not commit. See what the opposition does. Sometimes it puts the opposition, it makes them feel uneasy, Robbie, and they don't know what to do. And then I'll put down there, trust in each other. So if you worked on it and you've done your jobs during the week and you're going into a game, trust that each other knows what they're doing when you go onto that pitch. And then I also recognise the poor pass from the opposition and recognise the poor touch from the opposition. Why have I put that? Because that's the time to pounce. That's the time to go and win that ball back. And you've got to make sure you've got your players primed for that kind of thing. Okay. So how does the scoring go? Obviously, if the Reds can break through and get the ball in one of the 3 goals, the small goals, then they obviously get a goal. If the Yellows can win the ball back and travel over the line without the 5 and 6 intercepting and nicking it, they'll score a goal as well. What I would sometimes do on this session, Robbie, was if the 9, for instance, won the ball back and travelled over the line and put his or her foot on it, I would get the 6 to punch a ball straight into the Reds and look at the recovery run of the 9. And then that was something way back in this webinar. If the recovery run wasn't right, I'd go and have a quiet word with them, or Chris would, or one of the other coaches there might step on the pitch and just say, think about your recovery run. What's the recovery run, etc., etc.
I think that's a really, really important point, isn't it, Jimmy? Is that quite often when coaches will work in an organised mid-block, it'll be from organised mid-block positions. And actually, sometimes when we're in that transitional element, we need to see what they do to actually get into that shape before they actually do anything when they're in that shape. And having that transitional piece is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, not everything's set up to be perfect on a football, but the game's fluid, as everyone knows, and again, I would encourage people and coaches on this call, set your practices up so it's not always you're in shape, because a lot of the time you're not in shape when transition happens. And what are you doing about getting that shape back? And how? So, for instance, when we talk about the mid block, the delay, the deny, what does that look like? How are you going to do that? If not, can you press that ball straight away? So, you've got to work on the transition. You've got to work on those things. And it's really important that if your mantra as a football club is recovery runs are a sprint, then there's no hiding place for the players. Recovery runs need to be a sprint. So what are you doing within your practice design and in your coaching that allows those things to happen, allows those things to take place? So literally, within a structured setup, which I've got there, I can quickly turn that into a situation where the 9 and the 11 might be out of shape, or the 7 might be out of shape, and I punch a ball as a coach behind the 6 and the 5 straight into the 11. Now what's the 7 do in terms of recovery? But equally, what does the 8 do in terms of delaying it, being patient, staying on his feet or her feet, showing outside, don't let them come inside you. So all of a sudden things happen really, really quickly, and you can go, as I said earlier, the game's fluid, so you can get loads and loads of it out of it. And equally, the game, you don't necessarily have to manufacture everything. The game in its own essence will create problems for you.
And just from a practice design principle point of view, obviously it's your pitch geography and the players that you've got in the practice. There would have been some thought process behind that, Jimmy. So just for the coaches at home, what were you thinking in terms of the numbers of players, the players that you actually had in the practice, and also then the pitch geography?
So the pitch geography is roughly where I would say a mid-block would take place, although some would argue it's a little bit deeper. Some would argue it might be a little bit higher. But that for me would be, I'm happy with that. In terms of the players that are there, at Forest, we played a number of times. I said it already, but we played 4-4-2. But our predominant system was 4-3-3. So the 6 players that are on there for me are the people that start the mid-block. It's not a defensive action in terms of a back 4 that starts a mid-block. It's the 7, 9 and 11 who are the triggers to say, right, this is what we're doing. This is how we need to get back into shape. And this is our compactness. And then from that, the 8, the 4 and the 10 take their positions off the 9, 7 and 11. Equally, it's if the 9 drops into the pocket towards the 8 and the 4 red, does the 4 follow him? If not, what happens? Who picks the 9 up coming into the pocket? Does my 9 drop deeper? What is my 9 doing? And we haven't really touched on the scanning of looking over your shoulders and knowing what's around you, and even your body shape there. Could the 9 be like a little bit not so square on all the time, but maybe a little bit half and half, where his or her shoulders are open a tiny bit to have a quick glance to see what's behind them. If they are square on, can they keep glancing, keep looking? Also talked about the communication from the 4, 10 and the 8. So they were I'd call them my 2 units. A lot of people talk about 2 banks of 4. These were my 2 banks of 3. And I started the 11 and the 7 off in wider positions. I could have put arrows on this, but I started them off for a reason, because I then want to see their first reaction. So as soon as that 6 plays to 5, if I don't see a movement from the 7 and the 11, then I'm going to be questioning. And sometimes I'm comfortable in my own skin and with the players that know me to stop that session and say to the 7, what should you be doing? And the 11, what should you be doing? And then equally saying to the 8, the 4 and the 10, well, why don't you tell them? So don't be afraid to say that to them. But, from my point of view, I think, you can get loads and loads out of this practice, but they were my 2 main areas. In terms of, the 2 main banks of players. In terms of the Reds scoring in certain areas, they would have to get over the halfway line before they could score, so that the actual natural halfway line, which would cut the pitch in half, they would have to get over that before they score. Obviously, again, people on the call would say, what about chipping it over? Well, you know what? If they want to try chipping it over, then I'd expect my 4 to drop off and actually understand the triggers about the opposition doing that. So could my 4, 8 and 10 actually drop into a deeper position where they're picking it up? But behind those small goals, you'd have your line, or you'd certainly have your 2 centre halves for sure. Your 2 fullbacks might be wider and then need to tuck in a little bit.
Great. No, great insights into both, the technical, tactical detail that you've unpicked there, but also then the thought process behind it, and how you get to that stage of this is almost the output, the finished product in terms of the delivery, but the stages that you get through in terms of the design is really important for coaches to consider. And we talk about relevance, realism, and repetition, and I'm sure there would have been things that throughout this process you would have considered to make sure that the players got enough returns out of it that would help support them be able to deliver or do the mid block in game environments. Sure. Just to close things off, and thanks again, Jimmy, for that. Just to revisit the webinar outcomes or intended outcomes that we showed at the start. Hopefully through the hour or just over an hour, we've covered all of them off for you. So we've had a look at the England DNA and explored that in terms of key messages, concepts, strategies and tactics. We've also then brought that to life through different case studies and Joe's fantastic story of the FA Cup run and the information around how they prepared towards the Man City game. And then finally, Jimmy bringing to life a practice that he's delivered and designed and delivered with players unpicking some of the technical skills, but also the thought process behind it. So I guess the last thing, and just to wrap things up completely, is just a big thanks for all of you giving up your time on a Tuesday night to come and sit with us for the 90 minutes that we've had. We've timed it just about nicely for you to get away for the match, which starts at 8:15. So that's a tick in the box for you guys. The recording from the webinar will go live. Will go onto the FA Learning YouTube channel in the next few days. So if you did want to revisit some of the content, then please feel free to have a look at that. There is also loads of different webinars on there. If you haven't already accessed the YouTube channel, the FA Learning YouTube channel, please do so. There's loads of great learning there for you to get around. And then the last thing to say is you'll get awarded 2 hours of CPD for watching this live. So that'll go on your licenses in due time as well. My last thing is in terms of thanking the audience for coming on is also a massive thanks to Joe and Jimmy. Been a real insight from you two and a real pleasure talking football with you and bringing the mid-block to life over the last 90 minutes or so. So thanks very much from you two. And I guess that's it from everyone, guys. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Take care.